Please welcome Kévin Dunglas.
Hi, everybody. So let's say it now. In your projects, you may not need an API. And if you are just building a website, use Livewire. There are better solutions now than a lot of JavaScript. But at some point, your project, your startup will likely be successful. I hope so. And then your customers will need to access to the data from your system to trigger some remote code. And at some point, you will need an API, even if it's not to build a website. That's the main point of the API platform project. So my name is Kévin Dunglas, and I come from France, but it's easy to hear. And I'm the creator of many open source projects, including front-end PHP and API platform. I work at a French company, and if you manage to say the name, come at our booth, you will have a free beer, for sure. So what if you were able to create a state-of-the-art API with a lot of features and able to serialize the data in JSON web standards that are the most modern ones, using a single PHP attributes. Actually, if you are using Symfony, it has been possible for 10 years. But since September, it's also possible using Laravel, because we added support for Laravel to the API platform framework. So let's discover that. With this single attribute, you will be able to get the API, the entire API, following the latest best practices in the API world, with a lot of features, but my favorite one is that you will describe the public data structure that you want to expose through your API as an eloquent model or as a plain old PHP class. And you will use PHP as a language to describe your API. If you're familiar with the API world, you likely used OpenAPI or Hydra or formats like that to design your API, create the documentation of your API, and then you write some code to implement it. With API platform, you will first create the documentation of your API. You will think how to make your API the easiest way to make your API usable by your end users. You will use PHP to describe the JSON payload that you want to expose through the API. You will use the type system of PHP, for instance. And API platform will take care of generating the documentation in many formats like OpenAPI or Hydra. And then it will also automatically expose the API. That's the main goal of the project. So API platform is an API-first framework. That means that it has been designed for big APIs in large projects, for big companies that want to build all the information system around the API. Everything, all the clients, all the code in the company, all the microservices need to call the API. But it's also totally usable in a teeny project where you just want to expose an API for a mobile app or something like that. And from the beginning, the main idea behind the tool was to be able to create this kind of very modern and state-of-the-art APIs, following all the modern best practices and security standards and things like that, while being super easy for the developers. The main keyword is productivity. We want you to be able to expose a really great API, but you don't need to be an API specialist. So by default, with API platform, you get what are considered the best practices in the API world. In the framework, there are also some JavaScript libraries that are able to consume the documentation exposed by the API to scaffold some code. There is a command built in JavaScript that allows to generate some CRUD applications for Next, Vue, Angular, Next, Quasar, and many others. And there is also an administration system, a back office system that is quite similar to Laravel Nova, but it will use the documentation of the API to build the administration system. That means that everything in these tools are dynamic. If the API changes, the documentation of the API will change. For instance, if you add a new resource or a new property, the documentation will be automatically updated. The API itself will be automatically updated to expose the field. And then all the clients will be automatically updated to take that into account. So API platform is a quite old project. It's a 10 years old project. And it already has a very big community because it's quite popular in the Symfony ecosystem. Who already tried the Symfony version of API platform? Raise your hand. Some of you, okay, nice. Actually, all the features that we have been building in API platform for 10 years for the Symfony version are available for Laravel. The code is exactly the same, but the API is not, because we wanted API platform for Laravel to feel like a Laravel package. And so we worked with famous contributors of the Laravel ecosystem, including Taylor, to have the best user experience possible and the best integration with the building bricks that are provided by Laravel. So you have all the experience and the maturity of the projects that has been built in the Symfony ecosystem, but you have the feeling and, let's say, the magic of Laravel with it. So let's see how it works. First, you need a Laravel application. So you can use the usual tools. You can also use the tool in existing Laravel applications. Then you will have to require the Laravel package provided by API platform and to run the API platform install artisan command. Just by doing that, you will use the code that has been mostly written by Antoine Bluchet, so follow him on the social networks. I'm the original creator of API platform, but most of the Laravel integration has been done by Antoine. So if you encounter bugs, call Antoine, not me. So in the Laravel package, we have a Laravel provider that will register all the services that are provided by API platform. So basically, we will wire all the features provided by API platform, including the ones that are also available in the Symfony version, in your Laravel dependency injection container. Then we have support for REST routing. That means that automatically, as API platform is a resource-oriented framework, when you will map DTOs or eloquent models, the routes will be automatically registered, and a specific controller dedicated to APIs will also be registered, and your API will be working. Don't worry, you will be able to customize everything. When I say everything, I mean really everything. My favorite feature, the documentation. So there is also a documentation endpoint that will be added to the routing, and you will be able to generate an OpenAPI documentation and Hydra documentation, and we provide a UI that you can use to play with the API, to create sandboxes and things like that. There is also GraphQL support. It's optional, but you can, with the exact same code, get a REST and a GraphQL API that will follow the best practices of the GraphQL ecosystem, and you will be able to use all the JavaScript tools provided by Facebook, Apollo, and things like that. And This provider, this Laravel package, also provides integrations that are only available in the Laravel flavor of API platform with the Laravel features that you love, including Eloquent, of course, but also the validation mechanism of Laravel, with gates, with policies, with Laravel Octane, with the broadcast system and Laravel Echo, and we even provide specific assertions for PEST to make easy to test the API using PEST or PHP unit. So, API platform was, in the very beginning, a Symfony bundle. But since version 2 of the framework of API platform, it is usable as a standalone PHP library, and it was already possible to use this standalone PHP library without any framework or with Laravel by writing your own provider and your own integration with all the Laravel tools. It's what we have done in V4. Since September, there are 2 official integrations for API platform, Symfony, but also Laravel. And Laravel is now a first-class citizen as Symfony. And we ensure that all new features are available on both frameworks. As it's the same code, that means that you get all the features, and you can go on the website, you will see that we cover basically all use cases that you can have with your API that were supported with Symfony. So if you don't use Laravel, I don't know why you don't use your Laravel, but anyway, if you write your own framework, this is fancy. Real developers always create a framework at least one time in their life. So if you want to try that, you can create an integration with the API platform because it's also available as a standalone library. So now we have API platform, I mean the API platform core library containing everything that is shared with Symfony and usable without any framework. And we have the Laravel provider. So we can start the development web server. And if we go on the API route, the API URL, we can see that a nice tool has been automatically made available, and it will display the documentation of the API that will be automatically and dynamically exposed by API platform. So create an Eloquent model as usual, or use an existing one. Both are supported, of course. Create a migration to add some columns in the database. Run the migration as usual to be sure that the columns and the tables are available in the database itself. And here is the magic. Add the API resource attribute that is provided by API platform on the Eloquent model. And that's all you have to do to get a first-class API. All the standard REST operations will be automatically registered. The get, the post, the delete, and the patch routes are available, and you can try that right now on your computer. The routes are working. The data is retrieved from the database. If you send a post request, the data will be added to the database. Everything is working as expected. And better than that, everything is documented. You can see on this screen that API platform has been able to introspect the Eloquent model to find all the columns in the database, all the types of the columns. You can add some human-readable documentation using PHP docs. If there are relations between models, they will be documented and available too. And documentation has been automatically generated for that. So the documentation is always up to date with the code. And when you will trigger the API, everything will be exactly the same. I mean, the JSON that will be generated will be exactly the same as the JSON schema that you can see in the API documentation. And it's one of the key features. Everything, the docs and the code are always in sync. So if you use the Swagger UI tools that we provide to test the API, or if you use curl or Postman or something like that, and you try to retrieve some data, you will get this JSON document. You can notice the weird keys starting with a @ It's because, by default, API platform use a standard from the W3C that is used by almost all Google APIs called JSON-LD. It's a very advanced format that allows to add metadata to the JSON payload. So it's very useful for client developers, but it's entirely optional. If you don't need these kind of advanced features, just ignore the keys starting with a @ and we will see another option later. So by default, API platform will follow the most modern API best practices, including serializing the JSON using JSON-LD. And it will also do something nice. It will paginate the data. Of course, everything is configurable, but as you can see in this example, we have some metadata with the number of items in the collection and things like that, but we have also the pagination that is automatically enabled. So with a single PHP attribute, we got working REST endpoints, automatic pagination, automatic data validation, so if the JSON that is sent through the API doesn't match the types defined in your Eloquent model or in your PHP class, you will get proper data validation. Automatic Open API and Hydra documentation. JSON schemas that you can reuse in JavaScript, for instance, or in any other programming language, available for all the JSONs exposed through the API. A UI that can also be used by your customers as a playground. And another thing that is very interesting, there are a lot of security best practices that are hard to implement correctly for APIs. It's implemented by default by API platform. And you get support for a true hypermedia API, so it's the best practices for advanced APIs that is generated out of the box with support for JSON-LD. That means that it's very easy to use with the AI world, for instance, because there are a lot of tools using JSON-LD in this field. It's the same if you are in the SEO field. You probably know schema.org. Schema.org is relying on JSON-LD, and so it's very easy to improve the SEO of your website with API platform because you just have to copy the JSON that has been generated by your API in the HTML, and Google will be able to extract all the structured data from your pages almost by default. And it also implements basically all the web standards from the IETF regarding APIs, including how validation errors must be available for clients and things like that. And you don't have to code it. To do that, actually, API platform will introspect the PHP class or the Eloquent model and use some kind of internal metadata that you can reuse for other use cases and that you can customize using some custom code if necessary. In API platform, again, even if it's very, very easy to use, by implementing some services, by registering some Laravel services, implementing some interfaces, everything is documented. You can take the control of everything. For instance, if you don't want to use JSON-LD, but you want something that looks more simple, like JSON API, the format used by the API resource feature of Eloquent, then you can just enable this format because it is supported out of the box in the configuration. We have an adapter for that and for many other formats. And if you want to get full control over the JSON that will be serialized and documented in the OpenAPI documentation, you can just implement a single interface, and you will be able to do that. We also have support for GraphQL. So if you are in the GraphQL field, If you want to expose an endpoint to your end user for your end users to be able to just cherry pick all the properties of all the data that they want in a single HTTP request, just enable GraphQL in the configuration. And you get a GraphQL API with this single PHP attribute, exposing all the eloquent models or DTOs that are mapped with API platform. The introspection endpoint that is required for GraphQL APIs will be automatically supported by API platform, and you even get a UI to play with the API in GraphQL. All the features that you are used to in Laravel are supported out of the box. If you want to hide some fields, you can use the hidden property as usual. If you want to select explicitly the fields that will be made available through the API, you can use the visible key, the visible property. We also have a lot of filters that are available by default for Eloquent. For instance, if you want to be able to filter collections by the title key, you can use this attribute, and automatically API platform will register the filter, make it available in the documentation. So for instance, here you can see that you can pass a title query parameter to filter the collection by title, and it's working. The SQL query will be done automatically using Eloquent to filter the collection, and then it will be serialized. And in the JSON, you will even be able to see what filters have been applied. We have filters for text, for dates, for Booleans, to sort the collections, to play with ranges, and we even have more advanced filters implementing some modern API standards, for instance, to be able to select the list of the fields that we want to include in the JSON response and let the client do that. You can configure the API very easily because there are a lot of settings in API platforms that you can use to tweak the API that you want to expose. You can set the options globally in the config directory. You can use the API resource attributes and its properties to configure things at the resource level, let's say for all books, for instance. And you can also configure all the things at the operation level, like just for the post route of the books. So for instance, in this example, with again only attributes, I'm able to say that I only want 10 items per page, and I want my API read-only. Here, the post and the delete and the patch endpoints will not be available for this resource. Authentication works as you expect. That means that Laravel users are supported. You can use Sanctum, Passport, or Socialite. That works. Data validation can be enhanced using a form request provided by Laravel. So if you implement a form request, it will be detected and used automatically by API platform. All the constraints that you will add will be enforced by the API and documented in the API documentation automatically. So for instance, after having added this form request, if I try to send some invalid data through the API, the error will be generated in a front-end friendly format, so it will be easy to detect the errors and display them to the end user in JavaScript, for instance. Policies are supported, so if you want some advanced authorization logic, you can just write a policy as you do with Laravel in general, and it will be automatically enforced by API platform again. And if you want to get full control over the data that is exposed to the API. For instance, you don't want to expose your Eloquent model, but you want to expose some kind of DTO. Then you can just write a plain old PHP object, and map it with an API platform attribute. You will have to hint the system to use what we call a provider or a processor. That means a class that will fetch the data from your persistence system, from your domain, and hydrate the DTO that will be used by API platform, or a processor. It will get the data, it will receive the data from the API that will come from the JSON payload, and you will be able to do whatever you want with that. So here is an example of a provider. So with the attribute, on the DTO, I tell API platform, OK, use this class. Then this class will be automatically executed. I will be able to fetch some data from somewhere. I can add the logic that I want in this class. And I just need to return the initialized DTO. And API platform will take care of serializing this DTO as a JSON and to document everything in the OpenAPI or Hydra documentation. Of course, we have Franken PHP support through Laravel Octane. Spool and Roadrunner are also supported. So if you install Octane, you get the full power and the full speed of the framework. And everything in API platform has been designed for speed. We have front-end tools that I will not have the time to cover during this talk, but we have also a lot of JavaScript libraries that are compatible with the API documentation automatically generated by the PHP part, and that you can use to scaffold progressive web apps and things like that. Here is a quick screenshot of the administration interface built on top of React UI, React admin, that is automatically generated with a single React component having as parameter the URL of the API. And you can, of course, customize everything in React. Something I'm very proud of, a quote from Taylor on Twitter. We are so excited that API platform now supports Laravel. It's never been easier to create best practices APIs using Laravel when paired with API platform. And that's something that was very, very nice to hear. Thank you very much. And we have a booth at the front door of the main entrance, at the front door of the room. So we have some swag, and we are there to reply to your questions. So enjoy the end of the conference, and see you for a drink after.
Have to move around. Hello.
Hello.
Got 2 questions.
OK.
So first of all, great job. That looks impressive. So first question is from Stefan. He's asking, how do you handle API versioning using the API platform?
That's a good one. REST and GraphQL best practices are don't version your API. It's breaking the REST pattern. So in API platform, we provide a way to deprecate fields and resources, and at some point, hint the client that the endpoint or the field will be deprecated and will not be available anymore at this time or things like that. So it's what we recommend, and actually it's what is recommended by all API experts. But as everybody wants to version the API and to break the REST design patterns, we also very easily allow us to use serialization groups or to use root prefix to add some versions in the serialization groups or in the prefixes, in the roots directly. And there is also a way to pass the API version through HTTP headers and then change the JSON that will be serialized depending on these headers.
That's an option. So last question. It's my question. It's hard to say your company name. So I have my wife, she's French, so I'm in a bad turf here. Yeah. So I'm going to try it, And maybe you have a little tip for me, at least for this. So is le titel
Almost. Letilleul.coop. To be honest, the story behind this name is that we were in a rush to quit the paperwork to start the company. So we used the name of the bar. And that's a true story.
That's always a good one. That's one way to solve it.
But
as
no more computer. Okay. No problem.
okay.
As it's very hard to pronounce, and we try to go in other bars in other cities sometimes, we will soon change the name of the company to be just Til. So we will keep some part of the name, but it will be til.coop very soon.
That I will remember. A lot easier. So,
thank you.
Big round of applause for Kévin.
Thank you.